Good morning. My name is Kristen Ott, and I am on the board of directors for the Savannah Book Festival. Thank you all so much for being here and braving the chilly weather this morning. I'm also the co-chair of the author selection committee, so if you happen to see me around later today and want to talk about who you would like to see at the festival, I would love to hear your thoughts. And get those. We're already starting planning for next year. So I am up here. If you have already gone to a session this morning, you've already heard this once, and then you will continue to hear it for the rest of the day, because for the first time in a long time, the festival is a little short on funding this year. We have very generous donors, but our expenses have gone up considerably. The cost for the restrooms, the cost for the permits, the cost for the venues, the cost for accommodations at hotels in towns. Like, everyone who lives here knows everything is more expensive. So if you can, if you love this festival, please scan this little QR code on the back of your program and donate through Venmo. It really, really does make a difference. Of course, it's tax deductible. And I'm going to turn it over to one of our fabulous volunteers. There you go.
Thank you. Welcome, fellow book lovers. I think you can probably hear me without this, but I'm not that tall. I'm Mayor Reese Cunningham, and I'm welcoming you to the 16th Annual Savannah Book Festival. This year's festival is presented by the Philip E. and Nancy B. Beekman Foundation, David and Nancy Cintron, Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, and the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation, with a special thanks to a grant from Georgia Humanities. As Kristen said, you're going to hear this every time, every session also. We're especially grateful to an anonymous donor for sponsoring the Lutheran Church of the Ascension Fellowship Hall today. We'd also like to welcome our generous sponsors and literati members today. It's through your support that we are able to make the festival events this Saturday free to the public. 90% of our revenue comes from our donors and literati members, and we thank you very much. This year's festival is full of great events and authors, and we don't want you to miss any of it. So download the Savannah Book Festival app on your phone, and you can be in the know. If you need more information about the app is on the back of your program. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping tips. Ali Brady, also known as Allison Hammer, and Brady Godfrey, are you surprised? It's two people. Will be signing festival-purchased copies of their book at Telfair Square immediately following this presentation. Please take a moment to turn off your cell phones, and we also ask that you do not use flash photography. Now, on the back of your program, you'll also find a QR code for the survey. If you would please take a moment to fill it out. It's very helpful to us to have your opinion. It also is helpful to us to let the Savannah community know how well the festival is doing and that you do support it. Later, as you leave the venue, you will see our wonderful volunteers holding their yellow buckets. And we hope that you will make a contribution, but if cash is no longer your thing, you can do it through Venmo or actually on the Savannah Book Festival website. So again, you'll hear over and over how important you are and how important your support and your funding is. We'll have an opportunity for questions following the presentation. Please raise your hand and an author will bring you a microphone. Although we're such a nice, intimate group, we may not need to have passed around microphones, but it will be great. All right, Ali Brady is with us today, courtesy of Elizabeth Beekman. So, Ali Brady is the pen name of writing BFFs Allison Hammer and Brady Godfrey. Their debut novel, The Beach Trap, made several best of summer lists, including the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Parade Magazine, and Katie Couric Media. Their second book together, The Comeback Summer, is coming out June 6, 2023, from Berkeley Penguin Random House. Allison lives in Chicago. She's an SVP and creative director for an advertising agency. She has no kids, no plants, no pets, but she does have 2 solo books, You and Me and Us, and Little Pieces of Me. Brady lives in Utah with her husband, 4 children, and a dog. She's a physician and the author of a psychological thriller, Imposter. Please, let's give a warm Savannah welcome to Ali Brady.
Thank you all so much for being here. We are going to see, should we see if this other mic works?
Sure.
Okay.
So funny story, as you can see, there's 2 of us. A lot of times people don't know we're 2, and so we've shown up a few places where we've only had 1 chair for the 2 of us.
We might be able to.
I think we can
I
chair.
think we're fine.
We're
Okay.
good.
We're good. We're good. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Seriously, thank you guys all so much for being here. This has been like a dream, so it's just, we're so happy to have you guys here, and we're happy to be here. I'm Allison,
And I am Brady.
and we're Ali Brady. So we're going to talk today about, how we met and how we co-author a book, because a lot of people seem to be curious. If you were at the keynote last night, you saw from another author duo, and we had so much fun there just like hearing their story, and there's definitely a lot of similarities. But to start, I'm going to tell about our meet cute, since we have some romance in our book. And the way that we met is actually, I did a little bit of light stalking of Brady. We are both members of an online organization, Women's Fiction Writers Association. And through the organization, there's opportunities to trade work and do different like pitch contests and things. And there was a section or there was like a pitch present thing where everybody had like 250 to 500 words that they could share. And Brady and I had never interacted or anything, but I read her 250 words and I was like, wow, she's really good. I want to be her friend. It's a true story. And then a few months later, there was another opportunity in a critique group to swap pages, and we swapped pages and instantly hit it off. And when you're critiquing someone's writing, it's important that you like each other's writing and then also your critique style. I'd had somebody else critique my pages, and they tried to change like every word, and I'm like, you just don't like my writing, and that's okay. But Brady and I really hit it off. And so we did those 25 or 50 pages, and then more, and then more, and then more. And I literally remember the day she called me her CP, which stands for critique partner. And it's kind of like going steady for authors. And I was like, oh my God! It was super exciting. And so Brady will tell how we went from CPs to taking our relationship to the next level.
So this part all happened before we, were published. So we were trying to get literary agents at that period of time, and that's a long process where you email the agents and ask them to represent you. And anyway, fast forward, we both got agents separately. So we started out writing separately. And then, Allison published some books, I wrote another book, and it was the spring of 2020, which we all know what happened in the spring of 2020, and we were all in lockdown. I was home, homeschooling my kids, like so many of us were, the dining room table, and Allison was working from home, and, the world just felt so unstable at the time. We all remember that feeling, and we just kept talking about book ideas for something that was happy and uplifting and fun and gave you that satisfying, warm feeling at the end. And one day we were bouncing ideas off each other. Allison had an idea, I had an idea, and I said, why don't we put them together and write a book together? And she said, okay. And we just did. And and so we started working on a book together. And the thing that's funny about it is we each have separate literary agents. And you're supposed to get your agent's buy-in before you start writing a new book. But we didn't. We just started writing. And so we were deep into the book before we finally told our agents what we were doing. And each of them separately to us was like, are you sure? How well do you know this person? Because it's a big deal to go from being friends to basically business partners when you are writing a book together. And we're still best friends, but it changes things. And it's almost like when you go from being, dating to being engaged to being married, right? It's a different thing when you are running a household together. It's sort of like writing a book together. And so we started writing a book.
So actually, that first book that we wrote didn't sell, it's very typical. Like both of us, for our solo books, wrote a book before the book was published. But Brady's agent had an in with an editor who was pretty high up over at Berkeley, and they sent our book, which she loved the writing. She loved the idea of best friends writing together, but the book featured the pandemic. It took place in the pandemic, and they're like, just too soon. Like people aren't ready to read about it, even though it's really like uplifting pandemic. But so maybe one day it'll come out. But we had sent along. A lot of times you tell the agent or the editor what other book ideas you have, so they know you're not just one and done. So we had a paragraph about this book idea that we had, and the editor's like, "Now that book, I would love to read that." And when a very high up editor at a very big publishing company says that they'd be interested in reading a book, even though you haven't started writing it yet, you start writing it really fast. So we wrote 5 chapters and then did a very detailed outline. In fact, the editor was like, "What happened to the dialogue?" Because when we went from the chapter to the outline. And so on that proposal, we sold 2 books. So it was really just a dream come true. So do you want to start telling about the beach trip?
Sure. And I'll just add, it's really not very typical when you're a new author to sell a book on proposal. And so it really was like a pinch me moment that we were able to, get this. So let's tell you about this book. So the paragraph that we sent the editor that we eventually ended up working with was about a twist on the Parent Trap. So we grew up watching the old Haley Mills ones. You guys all remember that one? And then we also love the new one with Lindsay Lohan, like my kids have watched. And so we thought, what if we wrote a twist on the Parent Trap where instead of the girls trying to get the parents back together, it's the parents or a parent trying to get the sisters back together. So we came up with this idea about 2 girls who go to summer camp when they're 12 years old, and they meet each other, they become best friends in the way that you only can at summer camp when you're there together, just intimately doing everything together for weeks on end. And then toward the end of the camp, they find out that they share a father. And one of them was raised by the dad, the other one was abandoned by the dad, part of like a secret side family, and this totally fractures their relationship. They don't see each other for 15 years, and they don't speak until their father passes away. They're now in their 20s. Their father passes away, and he leaves them a rundown beach house in Destin, Florida.
So 15 years after, yes, so 15 years later, they meet at this beach house, and it does not go well. It is not a good reunion. And because both of them lost the same person, they both lost their father, but they had such different relationships with him, and they have different relationships and expectations with the beach house. So one of them, the one who didn't grow up with a father, she needs money for an altruistic reason to help take care of her grandfather, but she wants to sell the house because she has no interest in keeping it. But her sister, who grew up with her dad and grew up spending summers at the house, like that's her memories, and so she doesn't want to let it go. So they're instantly at odds, and we're going to read a scene that where they decide what's going to happen. So I won't spoil that, but they spend the summer repairing the house and their relationship, and it's a cartoony cover, so you can tell there is a happy ending. And like Brady said, when we started writing this book, it doesn't neatly fit into a genre. It's at the heart of it. It's a story about 2 sisters. But each sister has a romance because who doesn't love love? And really, it's a feel-good book that it's a summary and escape and friendship, and it's really all the things that we wanted to read in a book. So we're going to read a little section of The Beach Trap. 74.
Okay, so to set this up, the 2 sisters' names are Kat and Blake. So Blake is the one who was abandoned by the dad and wants to sell the house. Kat, and that's Allison's going to read for Kat. Kat is the one who wants to keep the house. And Kat grew up in a very privileged family in Atlanta, and she sort of had all her needs and wants met, without question. And Blake grew up in a pretty, a poor family with her mother, who eventually passed away and was raised by her grandparents, and just didn't grow up with as many privileges. So they are here sort of discussing, because Kat wants to keep the house, but she doesn't have the money to just buy her sister out of the whole thing, right? Because it is worth some money. And so this is how they kind of decide what to do. Okay. All right, so Blake is sitting out on the back porch looking out at the beautiful Gulf of Mexico. Has anybody been to Destin who's here? It's so gorgeous. I had never been there. I'll just pause for 1 second. I had never been there before until we were researching the book, which was so hard.
You have to suffer for your craft sometimes.
But I was just amazed. Like, I had never seen sand that white and beautiful, and the Gulf has that beautiful sort of emerald green. Anyway, if you can imagine being out there sitting on the beach and staring at it, and she's talking to her best friend on the phone, telling her what has just happened. She's down at the beach house. She's trying to sell it. Kat has come in, and they sort of argued about what to do. She's talking to her friend, and she hears the door at the back of the house opening and closing, and then the stomping of feet. It's Hurricane Kat coming in like a Category 5. So she hangs up with her friend. Just as Kat barges out onto the deck, her jaw set in the stubborn way I remember from camp, like the day she'd been determined to conquer the rock climbing wall, even though she was terrified of heights and had fallen 3 times already. Right now, I'm pretty sure Kat sees me like that wall, as a problem to be conquered. I stand, determined not to let her look down on me any more than necessary.
Like I said, Kat says, brisk and businesslike, I can't buy you out now, but if you give me to the end of the summer, I'll figure it out. And in the meantime, I've decided that I'll let you update the house.
I struggle not to roll my eyes. Great, thanks so much for letting me do something I have every right to do. She shoots me a withering glare, then continues.
I want to make sure you don't change anything without clearing it with me first. I have certain standards for my house.
Well, it's half mine, so maybe I'll just fix up half of it, I snap, then bite my tongue. It's not just that I hate confrontation, I also hate getting emotional in front of other people. After my mom died, I was overly emotional, crying at school, and it caused some problems for me, and I had to talk with the school counselor twice a week to work through my issues. It was embarrassing to be singled out that way, and the kids tease me even more, and after that, I've learned to keep my emotions inside until I know I can trust someone, and I definitely can't trust Kat.
The house belongs to both of us, she says, her tone implying that she isn't happy about that, so we should both be involved in fixing it up.
You're welcome to stay here all summer and work alongside me. I'm calling her bluff. The thought of Kat with safety glasses on her face and sawdust in her hair is laughable, as unlikely as me getting dressed up in designer clothing and doing the catwalk for Instagram likes.
I'm not staying here if you're here, she says, as expected. We'll have to trade off. I get a week, then you get a week.
I'm not going to waste money on a hotel when I own half a beach house, and I can't drive back and forth to Minnesota each week.
That's not my problem.
Yes, it is, because you're the one who doesn't want to stay here together. I assume this will make her back down. I'd love it if she would go back to Atlanta until I'm done fixing up the house. Kat's eyes light up like something has occurred to her. It's the same look she got when she talked me into sneaking out of our cabin one night to take a canoe out on the lake. I was terrified that we were going to be caught and punished. It ended up being fun, magical actually, staring up at the stars, the boat rocking with the waves, but I am not in the mood to entertain positive memories of Kat Steiner. My shoulders tense in anticipation of what she's going to say next.
Since you don't appear to have a problem with a little construction, how do you feel about cleaning? My friend just lost her housekeeper. You could stay in their casita. They won't even be there until the 4th of July. They need someone to tidy up the main house, make sure it's clean and dusted when they come back. They'd even pay you. It'll be easy money, and you can stay there the weeks that I'm here.
I bristle. Kat thinks of me as hired help, someone she can farm out to her rich friends. I open my mouth to spit out a retort, but then close it again. I refuse to spend the summer allowing Kat to get under my skin.
Thank you, guys. It's really fun to do that. There's definitely some, even though they didn't grow up together, there's some sisterly tension and fun between those two. And again, it was really interesting hearing the speakers last night talk about how they write together. And the way that we write together is that we each take a character at the beginning, and that becomes like our character. And we do a lot of work in the beginning. A lot of writers are either plotters, where they plot everything out, or pantsers, where they just start writing and fly by the seat of their pants. And as much as it's like we share a brain sometimes, we don't actually. And so we have to do quite a bit of plotting. And so our outlines are pretty intensive. And so the way that the process works is that we each will draft a chapter. So usually we have a pretty strict schedule. And one of us will each draft one of our characters' chapters for the week, and then we'll swap and edit. And it goes back and forth like that a lot. And one of the really fun things for us with this book is people that know each of us individually really well couldn't tell who wrote what character. We were a little secretive about it because we definitely, both impacted each of the chapters. Oops, sorry.
Yes, so it really is so much fun writing a book with someone because you are sort of, even though we know what is going to come next in the book because we wrote the outline together, there's still a lot of flexibility that happens. New ideas come up, and so every week I would write my chapter and then I would know what was coming in Allison's chapter. So it was sort of like writing a book and reading it at the same time because I got to read hers and then it would just go back and forth. So it makes this really fun momentum of discovery that it's so different from writing a book on your own.
So again, there seems to be a lot of interest and curiosity about the process of writing with someone. So we put together a list of pros and cons on writing a book with your best friend. There's pros and cons, but it's mostly pros.
Okay, so the first pro, and I mentioned this before, is that you can take a vacation with your best friend and call it research. So we, went to Destin, and even though Allison had been there dozens of times, her dad actually lives there. I had never been. I live in Utah. It's a long ways away. So anyway, we had to plan a trip so that I could research. I had to know what the oysters tasted like. I had to feel the sand. I had to go out to Crab Island. We had to do all the things. Otherwise, how would I know how to write about it? And bonus, it's tax deductible because it's for research.
One of the cons related to that is the price of air travel and the fact that we both have jobs and don't have all the unlimited vacation days. So thank goodness for technology. We both do Zoom and FaceTime a lot, but there are certain parts of the process that are just good to be together for. Research for one, getting to experience that together. I was there when Brady had her first raw oyster and got to capture it on video. It was just fun, just being there together. It's, and again, one of the things, like we said, both of our agents were like, "Are you sure?" And we've talked to a couple other writing duos, and one of the things they said is to make your friendship a priority. Have some things, you have some business things, but also make sure that you have some friendship time. And so that was really good for that. And when we're plotting a book, we've done it on Zoom and it works, but there's something about being together and bouncing ideas and coming up with it together. So we do try to get together as much as we can, but again, airfare is not cheap.
All right, the next pro is that you are accountable to someone else. So most writers will agree that one of the things that is so important to being productive is having accountability to someone else. So you have a deadline, you have to turn it in. We were talking to Shelby Van Pelt yesterday, and she was telling us how when she wrote her book, she had spent years trying to get it down on page. But then she met a friend and became her critique partner, and together they said, we're going to actually finish our books. And that was when she was able to do it. And so that makes sense, right? We're accountable to each other every week to turn our chapters in. We know the other person is expecting it. And so you make it happen. Even if you're struggling with the plot or it's not quite working, you get it done.
So that pro was the fact that you're accountable to somebody else. And the con is that you're accountable to somebody else. So it's easier to let yourself down than somebody else that you really care about. And so there can be a lot more pressure. If work is really busy or life is really busy, if it's just yourself, you can be like, I'm going to just push that aside. But when you're accountable to somebody else, it's not just your career, it's their career. And so there can be a lot of pressure for that. But luckily, again, there are two of us, and we've both had times. We try not to have a meltdown at the same time, but it's worked out really well. There was a time last May when I was just so overwhelmed with work, and we were on a deadline, and Brady's like, how can I help? And we give each other grace and understanding, because again, there's love there. And so we're both very kind and understanding with each other, and we can help pick up each other's slack. But there's a pressure because, I would rather let myself down than let her down.
All right, so for the next pro, ever since we started working together, I kept saying that our two heads together are better than our two heads separately. which sounds obvious, but what I mean by that is that if if I come with 5 ideas and Allison comes with 5 ideas, and then we start talking to each other, all of a sudden we have like 50 ideas. They just blossom because we're bouncing back and forth. And when you are writing on your own and you're responsible for coming up with everything on your own, you have to do a lot of solo work by yourself to get stuff down on the page before you send it to anybody for feedback. So having that natural feedback mechanism built in is wonderful, and it really helps that we can just sort of banter back and forth about ideas and just keep going and going and going, and it builds and builds, and it's really fun.
The next con is something that's inevitable, which is creative differences. Again, we don't share a brain, and most of the time that's good. And even, though we can have creative differences, a difference of opinion on a character or a plot or even like the setting, it's actually not a bad thing, because when somebody questions a decision that one of us made, it almost forces you to be like, okay, why did I make that decision? And we talk about it. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I was wrong. Or other times you can be like, oh, you know what? I just didn't clarify, or I didn't put what was in my head on the page. We did make a rule, this was Brady's suggestion, that each of us gets 1 veto. So there's one thing in each book that if we feel really strongly about it, no questions asked, it changes. We're working on our 4th book now together, and we've only had 1 veto. It was mine.
Do you want to hear what it was? Okay.
Okay.
It's kind of embarrassing.
Thanks, Brady.
Okay.
So,
Set it up?
Sure,
Okay,
okay.
I'll set it up. Okay, so in the book, this is not a spoiler, the 2 women are deciding if they're going to sell the house or keep the house. And so Blake, who wants to sell it, calls a realtor to come to the place, which, makes Kat really upset. And the realtor's barely in there, but I wanted to give her a funny name. Just a random funny name. And I started Googling, online, funny names that realtors have, funny names for different people. And so, what was her name? Randy Beaver. So I named her Randy Beaver. And she was a woman. And one of the joke in the book was that that Blake says, I picked her out of the list of real estate agents in Destin because any woman who can put the name Randy Beaver on her business card is, someone I can trust. So.
So yeah, it's funny. Like I didn't deny that, but the problem is that my dad's name is Randy Hammer, and I didn't know until I was like an adult that Randy was another like phrase for horny. And so my dad, and he's a sex therapist. I know. So I know. So, but I read that and I was like, Randy Beaver. It's funny, but it's just too close to Randy Hammer. I'm not comfortable with it, and. I'm like, and she's like, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, but like, it does. And so I asked my dad, he's like, it's kind of weird, but I'm like, I let it go. And then we had a friend read the book, and she was making comments in the margins. And when she got to the Randy Beaver, she's like Randy Hammer. And I'm like, see? I'm like, we can't do that. And so I used my veto, and we had a funny name, but her name is not Randy Beaver.
Yes. So you'll have to read the book if you want to know what her name ended up being. All right, so back to another pro. All right, another pro is obviously when you are writing with someone else, you get to share the load. So the first sort of draft of the book is very difficult to get on the page because you're taking something that's in your brain and putting it on the page. I have a much easier time once it's already there. So it's so wonderful in that first draft stage to have someone else to split it up with. And then we can divide up some of the business tasks, like who's going to post this thing on Instagram and who's going to reach out to the bookseller and who's going to respond to our publicist and all of that. And we have different strengths. And so that's very nice to have somebody else to say, can you do this thing that I'm not good at, and that type of thing.
The con associated with that is double the work for half the pay. So I know, right? Like you'd think that since there's 2 of us, they would pay us for 2 of us, but there's just 1 book. So, again, we're each only writing half of the book, but we're also editing each other's work. And we have a call at least once a week where we go over things. And that stuff takes time. And it's interesting, even when we get an email from our publicist, we make every decision that affects our career together. And so if it was just me, I could shoot an email to the publicist yes, absolutely, I would love to come to Savannah and come to this festival. But you have to take a minute and be like, Brady, do these dates work for you? And there's a lot of conversation and just making sure we're both on the same page. Obviously, the answer was yes, and we're thrilled to be here. But it takes more time. And again, our agents both get 15% of our half, and we split it. So everything, it's double the work for half the pay.
All right. I'm going to do another pro, some of our last ones. So one of the best things about writing with someone else is celebrating the highs and then sharing the lows, of course. So there's something really beautiful in the writing community where there's so much support between writers. And so if you have, if you sign with a great literary agent or you get a book deal, you can go to your writer friends and tell them, and they will celebrate with you. And it's a wonderful moment, but it is completely different than when you have a co-writer and you get an email from your agent. So you both get it simultaneously. I think we were at work. We were both, doing our day jobs, and we got this email like, Cindy Huang at Berkeley is going to make you an offer. And just, it was just amazing to get that together. And then to be able to celebrate with each other, there's nothing like that. You want to talk about lows?
Yeah. So, and when there are lows, again, your friends can sympathize with you and they love you, so they feel sorry for you. But when something happens to you together, it matters more because it's not just yours. And so it's pretty great. And, like Brady said in the beginning, we really do think about this co-writing like it's a marriage. And we're committed to each other for better and worse and all that fun stuff. As long as we both shall live or until our contract expires. But again, we make it really important, our friendship, we're important to each other. And so we make it a priority, just like in a marriage, you have to run the house or run the family, and we have to run Instagram and write a book and all these things. But, it's the best. And my solo book, my debut came out April 7th, 2020. And so everything I had got canceled. And that was terrible, but being able to have these firsts with Brady, even though we both had separate books come out, going on a book tour with your best friend, it just makes it more fun and more special. And so even this weekend, we're just so grateful to be here and for all of you to be here.
We tell the story of our book tour and going on tour. Okay, we'll tell you one more story. Okay. So we'll tell you one more story about what it's like to go on book tour with your best friend. So we, this is the very end. We went on a 2-week tour, it's tiring and it's exhausting. But it was wonderful. We stopped at a whole bunch of different places. But our last 2 events, one was in Greenville, and then we had to drive to Pawleys Island. And the Greenville date was a Thursday night. Mm-hmm. Thursday night at the end of our book tour. And it ended at about 9 p.m. And Anissa was there. Ended at about 9 p.m. And then our event in Pawleys Island was a luncheon the next day at noon. And it's a 4-hour drive away. So we thought we can either drive after the event in Greenville, drive the 4 hours and get there very late at night, or we can get up in the morning and drive in the morning. And then we might hit traffic and that. So we said, let's just drive at night. And so,
what kind of car did we have?
Oh, you tell about the car. Okay.
So Brady has 4 kids, so she drives a really big car. I live in Chicago. I don't have a car. So we were looking at renting a car, and they were really expensive. And so Brady's like, how much is a truck? So we got a pickup truck. And she's like, I can drive it. So we're 2 girls driving in the middle of the night, and Anissa was wonderful and bought us some pastries and sweets for the ride, which was she was a lifesaver. Stopped at a gas station, loaded up on junk food and things, and then entertained ourselves by singing to 90s music and doing a blind Starburst taste test. I'm really good, apparently, at telling what flavor of Starburst without looking at it. So we get to the hotel. It's about 1 a.m, and the bookstore put us up for 2 nights, which was amazing. But there was something in town going on that weekend, and so the regular hotel was all booked. So they put us at a Best Western, which I call the worst Western. So we get there, we pull up. Brady's like, just go check in, because who knows where we're going to have to park for the room. And I go in, and they're like, they told us about the room that we had, which I'll tell in 1 minute. But I was like, is there another option? And he's like, half of our rooms didn't pass inspection, so we're limited. And I'm like, oh my God. And it's 1 a.m, and we're so tired. So I walk out to the car. I'm filming this because, and I tell Brady, I said, we're about to live a romance trope. And she's like, what? And I'm like, only 1 bed.
So they just had 1 room in the entire place. This is like in every romance novel ever, right? 1 room in the entire place, and it only had 1 bed.
And she's like, we're gonna fall in love.
And when the bookstore asked us to come, they said they would get us 2 rooms, but we didn't want 2 rooms. We want to stay together. We're best friends. But we wanted 2 beds. But it was so late and we were so exhausted. So we just, I think we fell asleep around 3 a.m. because we were so slap happy. And then we had to get up early and get over to the luncheon.
But we were supposed to stay there 2 nights. There was also like stains on the carpet and really weird air conditioning noises. So we checked out that morning and ended up driving to a different city and staying at a gorgeous hotel to end it. But again, like if I had been at a hotel like that by myself in the middle of the night, I would have been terrified. So thank you guys so much. Those are our pros and cons of writing a book with your best friend. And now I guess we'll open it up to questions. Oh, you know what? One other thing, sorry. We do have another book coming out, and when you were reading our bio, I realized we didn't update. This is The Comeback Summer. It was supposed to come out on June 6th, but we got a call from our publisher that they wanted to move it up a month. So it is now coming out on May 9th, so it'll be on sale for more of summer. And we're really excited. We have some little cards for it if people want it.
Yeah. So yes, questions?
Question. Okay. So I read your book and I loved it. And it came at a time when I needed something uplifting, so I wanted to say thank you for that. But now you said that you were, if this is a spoiler, then don't tell me. But I'm just curious, you said you both took on a character. Who was who?
Do you want to guess?
Well, I'm going to...
You don't know it, so it makes it hard.
So I'm going to say because you read Kat, you were Kat and you were Blake.
Yes. So, and we do try to keep that a mystery, but like it's okay because it's been like a year. But a funny story about that we can't tell when we're trying to keep it secret. So there were construction scenes in the book, and I know nothing about construction. And Brady's husband helped with a lot of it, but we had agreed that Kat was going to be in charge of the aesthetic details because, again, she's like Instagram and everything. And there was a chapter that Brady wrote. I had it all planned out how Kat was going to pick the colors for the cabinets. And there was a chapter where Brady had Blake painting primer. And I was like, can you not have her do that? Because Kat's going to pick the colors. And she had to explain to me what primer was.
Oh, that's good.
I was like, it's just primer. And she was like, yeah, but Kat's going to pick the color. I'm like, it's going to be covered up. Do you know what primer is? And she was like, yeah, like makeup primer?
So that ended up in the book.
Yes. And that was a good part in the book. It was funny.
Hi, I read the book too. I loved it. How do you find time to write, though, with jobs and families?
That is a great question, and people ask that all the time, and I'm usually like, how do I find time? I try to think back, but, I think sometimes when you have the busier you are, the more, organized you have to be. And so I think it forces us to be very organized and stay on our schedule, which I really appreciate that. But I'll also say there's a lot of work that goes on mentally as a writer that you can do, while you are, driving your child to soccer practice or putting in a load of laundry, driving to and from work. And so you can be doing a lot of the mental work, and then when you sit down at the keyboard, you already have these ideas in your head. You already know where the dialogue is going. You're starting to get to know your characters. And so there is, even for people who are full-time writers, they still need a lot of that thinking time. So I think it actually works nicely. I really like having the balance between different things.
And Brady's really good at that thinking part. I am not as good at it, but even like the other night, we were like lying in our separate beds. We got 2 beds this time. And she was like, what does this character love about this character? What was this character like as a child? I was like, wow, that's good to think about. But as far as time, it depends. Sometimes my day job ends at 6, sometimes it ends at 8 or 9 or 10 because advertising is crazy. But I try to write. I do try to write a little bit every day, or at least think about it. But I usually write after work. I would love to be one of those 5 a.m. writers, but I sleep too much, and I'm just not good in the mornings. And then on weekends, I tend to do big chunks. So before the world shut down, I would my best way to spend a Saturday was going to Starbucks and spending like 7 or 8 hours there and just like really getting in the zone. So that's how I try to do it.
And my best writing time is usually when my kids are in bed. So it's typically like 8 to 10 I write. But it's harder now because my kids are getting a little older, and it seems like when they're moving into those teenage years, they want to talk to you between 8 and 10. They don't talk to you all day. And then at 9:30, they're like, Mom, something happened with my friend. And you put everything down when your teenage child wants to talk to you, and you talk to them.
Hi, not to be in competition, but this is my sister, and we want to do that the same way that y'all did. And my name's Kitty, like your character, so I really identified with that, and I really loved the book. It was a lot of fun. How did you get a literary agent, and what kind of online writing community is it that y'all talked about? Because we don't know. We don't know anything. We just like to read and go to book festivals.
Well, we both had very different experiences with that. And Brady's is a really good story. But so the writing group that we're in is called the Women's Fiction Writers Association, WFWA, and it's an incredible organization. It honestly like changed my writing life. Like it introduced us to get to each other. And Crystal, one of our friends, is here from it too. She came down to see us. And it's, one of the best things about the writing community is how supportive everybody is. One of my favorite things to say is that writing is not a solo sport. Even before we wrote a book together, one of my favorite things is my second book, Little Pieces of Me. There's one line that people always call out in reviews as their favorite line in the book, and Brady wrote it, even though it's just my name on the cover. So it is very, it's one name on the book or two for us, but there's so many other people that help with it. For me, getting an agent, my first book that I wrote took me 15 years to finish. And when I finished it, it was about 20,000 words too long, but I was like, I don't care, I'm done. And so I tried to find an agent with it. And one of the things they tell you is as soon as you finish one book, start your next one, because publishing is very long and very, very slow. So I started my next book, tried to find an agent. That process, you write a query letter, and it's like a lot of rejection. And one of the things that's so frustrating is that you might get a form letter, you might get a personal letter, or you might get silence. And if you don't hear from an agent in 3 months, it's considered a no. And so like there's a lot of waiting. In fact, there was a time where I queried an agent because she had a reputation for being really fast. I knew she wouldn't like my book, but I just wanted to hear something, even if it was a rejection. It was a very strange time. But when I finished my second book, I had 2 query letters, and I went to a literary event for writers, and there was an opportunity where you could pay $28 for 10 minutes with an agent, and I had like 5 different of these meetings. And the first agent that I met with, like 6 months later, ended up being my agent. And so I met her through that. I had her read my query letter, and then she asked for a full manuscript. So then you send her the manuscript, and cross your fingers and hope and pray that she wants to represent you. And there was a lot of rejection, but that's how I met my agent.
And then I'll tell you a little about mine because it was different. So I had been, doing the query process where you send these emails to agents and then you hope and pray that they respond back to you. I was getting, some people, some of them would say, yes, I'd like to read it. Some would reject, but it's very, very slow. But anyway, there was a contest on Twitter, of all places, and I don't really like Twitter, but there was a contest on Twitter where you could pitch your book in the characters allowed on Twitter, which is very short. So I had pitched the book, and then you use a hashtag for the pitch contest. So anybody who is interested in looking at these pitches, so agents or editors, can read through the hashtag and scroll through it, and then they'll like or heart the things that they want to see, right? So I did that. I just sort of threw it out there and did it, and it just picked up a lot of steam. It just got so many views and so many retweets and so many likes, and I had, a couple dozen agents ask for it, and I sent it. It happened on Thursday, and then on Friday, I sent out all the manuscripts, and then Monday at 7 a.m., I got a call from an agent saying, I want to represent you. So.
Not just one agent.
Yeah, there were 4. There ended up being 4, and they were wonderful agents. And it was just it was just sort of I think they're kind of like sharks. They smell blood, and so then they all jump in to try to feast. And I ended up going with the very last agent who offered because she's Nora Roberts' agent, and she's a legend. She's a legend in the writing community. So I ended up going with her. But it was one of those dream come true moments.
So you're still writing. I haven't read your book yet. I bought it.
Thank
looks
you.
good. But Are you still writing solo?
Yes, asterisk. You know, we both have different projects, solo projects that we're working on. My next solo project is actually a project that I'm working on with another writer. I'm not cheating on Brady. It's just a one-on-one thing. But like we both have like other stories that we want to tell and that we're working on. But right now you kind of want to go where there's energy. And again, it's so much fun. And I think that, you know, we're working on our third book now. So we got, about a month ago, we got another 2-book deal with Berkeley. So we've got 2 more Ali Brady books coming out after this. And so, you know, maybe there's a time when we're going to send our book to an editor to read or things like that. When we have downtime, we will probably start working on some of our solo stuff. But right now, like, we're just riding the Ali Brady train. Oh, yay!
This one does not. It takes place in Chicago, which was where Allison lives, and we wanted to prove to people that Chicago has actual beaches in the city. Very beautiful, gorgeous beaches. So we asked for this cover to be just like this, with the city behind it and the beach. But so it's sort of summer in the city vibes in Chicago.
And we did a research trip there too. Brady's husband came and was a great Instagram husband for us. And we had, like, in the book, there's a lot of, you know, walking on the lake and doing different, like, jumping and training things. And her husband, Nate, like, jumped for us. And, like, it was really fun. Oh, should we tell them about the tour?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll tell you about the tour.
Okay, so there's a character in the new book, The Comeback Summer, that loves H.H. Holmes.
You guys know who that is? Yeah.
Okay, so The Devil in the White City, the book.
Yes.
And so when Brady was here, like, she had an idea for the character to do these training runs, like, at scenes around the book. So we're like, let's do the Devil in the White City tour, because we're here and there's a bus tour. And it didn't go so well.
And I love The Devil in the White City. If you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book. And so, my husband was with us, so all 3 of us booked this bus tour around Chicago. It was 3 hours long, and they were supposed to, 3-hour tour. They took us to all the places that supposedly H.H. Holmes had been, and we were supposed to see the site of his murder castle, which is where I won't tell you all the details, but terrible things to people. But then we go to all these places, and everything is underwhelming. And the site of his, murder castle is just sort of an old post office in sort of a grungy area of town. And so they sort of like dropped us off, and we all, stood there staring at this post office, and we were just like, this is not interesting at all.
There were like empty chip bags, like rolling like tumbleweeds. And Brady was like, we might have to rethink the training runs. But she turned that into a really fun moment in the book. But that was one research thing that did not go as planned.
Do you have any writing tips for our
Sure. So for me, the hardest thing for me in the writing process is that first draft. It's really difficult to go from whatever you have in your head to putting it on the page. And so my tip for myself, I have to remind myself every time I do this, is just get it on the page. I try to write the first draft as quickly as possible and try to get it on there, even if it is terrible, and it usually is terrible. Nobody sees it but me, but getting it on the page allows you to edit it, and allows you to make it better. So I would just say, get it on the page. Don't judge your first draft. The job of the first draft is just to exist.
Brady tells me that all the time, because I need the reminder. And so my tip, I have 2 tips, but they're related. One of my favorite sayings is say it straight, then say it great. Because the hardest way to write something brilliant and beautiful is to try to write something brilliant and beautiful. It just doesn't happen. Jodi Picoult, one of my favorite authors, has a saying that I love. That's, you can edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank page. And so you literally just have to get it down. We call it the shitty first draft. And it's literally, Brady tells me all the time, its only job is to exist. Another thing that, just to share, that I love, again, my first draft of my first book took me 15 years to finish writing. If I have all the time in the world, I'll take all the time in the world. The book that ended up being my debut, I wrote in 2 months because of this program called NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And it's an organization that runs this event where writers around the world have 30 days to write 50,000 words. And there's something about that deadline. I'm really competitive against myself, so having that deadline. But there's this energy where all these people around the world are creating something, and it's fun, and you have word count goals every day. And if you're thinking about writing a book, and again, you'll take all the time if you want, I highly recommend trying NaNoWriMo. It's every November, and I think they have a camp version in the summer too.
What are you each reading now?
All right, so I am listening to a book called Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen, who is an audiobook narrator, and she's also an author. And it's a book about an audiobook narrator. And there's a love story and a lot of really lovely character development. And then you get a behind-the-scenes look at the world of audiobook narrators, which is super fascinating. We have a wonderful audiobook for The Beach Trap, too, but it just sort of appears to us. Like, we don't do anything for it. They just make it for us and come, so it's really neat to see the behind-the-scenes.
I've got about 30 minutes left of Miracle Creek by Angie Kim, and it's really, really good. And then we have another cool thing about just the author community is that sometimes we get advanced copies of books to read. And so we both got a copy of Megan Collins' next book. I think it's called Thicker Than Water. So I have that in my bag to start reading on the plane. But I'm also just a huge audiobook fan. I don't have time to sit and read, but I can listen while I'm doing almost everything except for drying my hair. That's the one thing I haven't figured out how to multitask through, but it's really the only way that I'm able to get through a lot of books, so I'm a big audio fan too.
I used to keep track, and I would get about 100 a year. I probably have dropped down now that I'm on like a deadline to write, but I would say I try to do about a book. I would say I average about a book a week, unless they're long. I recently read The Winners by Frederick Backman. Has anyone read his books? It's 700 pages long. It took me a little longer than a week.
I didn't know it was that long.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to go back and like read all of the. I read so fast sometimes I read a book and then forget about it. So I want to go back and like read that whole series. For me, I'm a person who like I feel pressure for goals, and so I like to set a goal I know I can achieve and then overachieve. So I set a goal for 50 books, and I usually get around 60. So I could set my goal for 60, but then it would just make me stressed out.
Well, thank you. We have one more question. And then you can head over to...
Well, I was really excited to meet Shelby Van Pelt, who I've never met, and like now we're friends with her. We met her yesterday and hung out, and now she's our friend.
Honestly, like, you know, one of the things I posted on Instagram last night that as new authors, like everything is so exciting for us, but one of the things I've been so jealous of is that writers tend to like seem to know each other. And I'm like, how does that happen? And it's through events like this where they, you know, get to meet each other. And because we've been in a pandemic world, we haven't had that. And so it is just like, we're just excited to be here. We're excited for the whole thing, just to meet readers and to meet writers, and like we're just having the time of our lives. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'd love to take a picture of the crowd.
Yes.
Okay, everyone
You guys can
smile.
wave.